Hello and welcome back to a new series. And in this series of videos, we're going to be talking about a lot of Spring Boot interview related questions. And it's going to be pretty exciting because we're going to be having deep dive. We're going to be talking about different concepts and we're going to be making our video crisp and clean. Okay, so you can use it for your Spring Boot interview preparation. So this is the first video of this series. So I just picked the very important Spring Boot question called what is Spring IOC, or what is dependency injection in Spring, or how Spring IOC and dependency injection works together in Spring to make a developer life easy. This is going to be a very straightforward question, but this will check your Spring Boot understanding. So without wasting any time, let's just get started. But before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Avilas, and you're watching Selenium Express. Now let's just get started with this particular video, by the way. Okay, so right now, first of all, let's just create a Maven project. Let's just click on new and click on Maven project. Click on next and choose the Maven archetype quick start. Click on next. Fill in the group ID as com.seleniumexpress.spring IOC. The artifact ID will be Spring IOC and the package name, let's say seleniumexpress.spring IOC. Okay, let's just do a finish. It will create the Maven project for you. Once it does all the setup, let's just put Y over here to create our project. Let's just get into our project called Spring IOC and let's just go to the source main Java and let's just get started with our coding. Well, the topic that we are discussing over here is called Spring IOC. So what is IOC? IOC means the inversion of control. So what do you mean by inversion of control? So basically it is inversing the object creation process. What I mean by that? So basically, if you are a Java developer, if you work with any kind of application, the most important thing that you do in an object-oriented programming like Java, whenever you're building any applications with Java, you basically create object. But in Spring, it is basically the inverse process. It's basically you as a developer will not create the object. Rather, the Spring will create objects for you so that you can take that object and can use it. And this is the first key thing to understand when it comes to Spring IOC. Let's just see that in action right now. We have our project called Spring IOC. Here we go. We have a package called com.seleniumexpress.spring IOC. Let's just go to our app.java class. And this is the class Maven has created for me. Let's just get rid of this hello world statement over here. And let's just create an object for a class right now. Imagine we have a class here called computer. Let's just create a new Java class. And let's just name it as computer. Okay. Imagine this computer class right now has a method. Let's just say is public void start method. Inside the start method right now, imagine I have a sysout statement and here I'm printing starting the computer. And let's just say I want to use this computer class start method in my application right now. So here is my application called Spring IOC. Here is a class that I have called app.java class. Let's just say if I want to use the start method, this is how we need to use it. We need to create the object of the computer like this, using the new keyword like this. And then I will call the start method of the computer class like this. All right. Now if I'll go ahead and run my application like this, I will get my desired output, which is starting the computer. That's great. Now, this is the point that I have just told you. Whenever you want to use some methods over here in your application, for an example, a computer class start method, you first need to create the object of the computer. And you as a developer has created this object, right? Nobody is helping you over here. Cool. Now I want to drag your attention to the very important second point. And this is all about the dependency injection. So what I mean by that? For an example, let's say here I have the computer class, right? Imagine to start a computer, we need a keyboard to connect. Okay, we need a keyboard which is connected to our computer so that we can give input to our computer, right? So imagine I have a class right over here called keyboard. Let's just go ahead and create a class here called keyboard like this. And let's say inside the keyboard class, we have a method called public void plugin. Okay. And let's say I have a sysout statement over here, which says plugging in keyboard. Okay, now let's just say this keyboard class, I want to use it in my computer, right? So in my computer class right now, let's say I want to use the keyboard class method called plugin. So first of all, I need to create the object for keyboard like this. Okay, and then I'll take the keyboard and I call the method of the keyboard class. There we go. So now if I'll go to my app.java and if I'll again run the start method of the computer, let's just see how it is behaving. Well, right now my computer is starting and then the keyboard has been plugged into my computer. So now the start method belongs to the computer class. So if I'll go to the start method, here I'm using the plugin method of the keyboard. Now here is the keyboard object and this is the object that I am creating over here inside the computer class. Now the computer class has a method called start. Now to work with the start method of the computer class, we need to instantiate the keyboard first because we are using this plugin method of the keyboard class over here. In case we will not instantiate the keyboard class over here, we will get a null pointer exception because this is null, and whenever we are doing null.plugin, we're going to be getting a null pointer exception. For example, if I'll go to app.java and if I'll run this, then I'm going to be getting a null pointer exception from my computer.java class in the line number 10. So we need to make sure we will be instantiating the keyboard like this. Okay, so what do you understand from here? It's pretty simple, right? The computer class right now has a dependency called keyboard. And to work with the computer class start method, we need to make sure that this keyboard property which presents over here need to be instantiated. And here we are doing a property injection. This is a dependency. This keyboard is a dependency which is present inside the computer. And we are doing an injection to this property called keyboard which presents here inside the computer class right now. And we are doing a property injection right now just like this. When we write this new keyboard, we are actually injecting the instance of the keyboard over here. We are doing a property injection. But we can also inject the keyboard properties using a setter method. For an example, if I can do a control 1 over here and click on this called create getter and setter for keyboard, and if I'll uncheck the getter method because I just want to create the setter method over here for the keyboard over here, then here we go. We can also inject the object for keyboard over here using this set keyboard method which takes a keyboard object as a parameter. For an example, if I'll go to app.java right now, and obviously if I'll run this application, it will give me the null pointer exception because right now when I call my start method, the keyboard has not been instantiated. So if I'll go back right now, and if I will do this, computer, and if I'll call the setter method of the keyboard, and if I'll instantiate my keyboard right over here, there we go. So I'm basically instantiating my keyboard over here and setting this object using this set keyboard method so that the set keyboard method can accept the keyboard and set it to this particular keyboard dependency which presents inside the computer. And here I am doing a setter injection. So if I will run this right now, my program should execute fine. Okay, we have done some simple coding over here, but what was our goal over here? The goal was very simple. We wanted to call the start method of our computer class. And that's why we have done this much of things. So the start method of the computer class, if you want to call, first of all, you need to create the computer object and you have to instantiate it so that you can reference to call the start method. The second thing that you have done the dependency injection. So you have taken a setter injection approach to inject the keyboard dependency to your computer class so that you can call the start method and it won't give you any null pointer exception. So basically, here first you are doing what? You are creating a new keyboard object. So if you're going to do a control 1 over here, and to simplify it, if I extract it to a new local variable. So here you are creating the keyboard object first, then injecting that object using the setter method over here to your computer class object. So before you basically use your computer class object over here and call the start method, you need to also create the keyboard object, and also you need to inject that keyboard object to your computer object using this setter injection so that you can get a completely fully constructed object of computer, and you can use the start method and you can basically achieve the functionality that you want to achieve, and you won't get any null pointer exception. But here comes the fun part. Actually, the Spring IOC or the Spring inversion of control doesn't want you to do these 3 steps over here. It doesn't want you to create the computer object. It doesn't want you to create the keyboard object, because Spring will take the responsibility of creating these objects for you. And the second thing is, Spring do not want you to do any dependency injection over here, because whenever Spring will create the computer objects for you, Spring will basically takes care of the dependency injection. The Spring will basically see, okay, I will right now create this object for the developer, and also I will make sure if there is a class called computer, and in case this class does have any dependency like this keyboard, then Spring will inject that dependency over here. You as a developer right over here do not need to create the dependency object, and do not need to set that dependency object over here using the setter method or any kind of dependency injection approach. So how can we prove that? Let's just bring Spring in to our application right now. So this is a Maven project. I'll go to the pom.xml file over here, and I will invite Spring over here, because these 3 steps I want Spring to perform. And to do that, first of all, I will go to Google Chrome and I'll look for the Maven repository right here. I'll go to the Maven repository first of all, and I will basically get in the Spring Boot starter, because the Spring Boot starter right now, where is the Spring Boot starter? Right here. This will basically give me the Spring core feature over here. Okay, so what I will do, I'll go to the latest version of Spring Boot and I'll bring in the Spring Boot dependency. I will go to the Spring Tools suite over here, and right over here I will go to the Spring IOC pom.xml. Inside the dependency, I will bring in the Spring Boot starter over here, which will get me a bunch of dependency of Spring framework so that I can perform different operation over here. And right now in your Maven dependency, you can see this dependency over here got me a lot of jars, and the most important jars that I want to use here is called Spring Core and Spring Context. These 2 jars will give me the dependency injection and the IOC support. So right now, as I said, IOC means inversion of control. We will not create the objects. The Spring will create the objects for us. Here in our app.java, we are creating the objects of computer. We are creating the objects of keyboard. So let's just first let Spring do these things for us. So the computer object I will not create, so I will comment it out. I will make sure I will go to the computer class and I'll tell Spring to create the object for me. The way I'll be telling Spring to do that, I'll be using the component annotation over here. So the Spring will basically create the object for computer and keep it inside a container. So whenever I'll be needing the computer object in my application to use it, I will ask the container, I will ask the Spring container that, hey Spring, can you please give me the computer class object? And Spring will say, here it is. Here is your object. You don't have to create it. I have already created it and I'm keeping it in my container. So you can ask me that object whenever you like to have it. So like that, in the app.java class right now, I do not want to create the keyboard object. I will let Spring to create the keyboard object. So what I will do, I'll go to the keyboard class and I will write the @component annotation over here. So the Spring will basically create the keyboard object and keep it inside the container. The next thing in the app.java class that I'm doing the dependency injection over here, and I'm calling the set keyboard method over here, and I'm injecting the keyboard object over here. So I'll go to the set keyboard method of the computer class. So let's just go to the computer class. Let's just go to the set keyboard method. I want Spring, whenever it is creating the object of the computer class, it has a dependency of keyboard. And I want to inject that dependency of the keyboard to the computer class by doing a setter injection. So I won't be performing that line of operation by myself. I want Spring to perform these lines for me. So what I will do, I will go to the computer.java class, and over the set keyboard method, I will just write AutoWord, and that's it. So right now Spring will do this line as well for me. So these 3 lines are done right now. Now I want to call the stat method of the computer class. Okay, to call the stat method over here, I need the object of the computer class, right? So basically I need this. I need a instance of this. This is the reference I'm using, and the reference is actually going to be a computer like this, and this is the object I need. But now the thing is, I won't be creating this object by myself. Right now, this object I won't be creating by myself. I will be asking the container to get me the computer class object. I do not want to do this by myself. Rather, this thing has already been done by the container or the Spring IOC. Right now, we just need to ask the container that, hey container, get me the computer class object. Get me the computer class object. We need to ask it to Spring. But I told that Spring has a container, what we call Spring IOC or inversion of control. Spring has a container which basically creates objects for us and keep it inside the container. We need to bring in that container. We have already added the support for the container in our application using this couple of jars that I have told you, core and context. Now inside this context jar, there is a container present called application context. So let's just initialize it. So application context, and let's just say container, and we need to instantiate the application context right now. Well, application context is an interface, but the implementation of this interface called annotation config application context. So I will create an instance of the container, and the container name is annotation config. Can I just do annotation config application context? So now here I'm instantiating a container over here. Now to the container, I will ask over here that container, please get me a bean. Can you please get me a bean? Of what class I want? I want the computer class bean over here, or computer class object over here. Bean means object. So I want the object or bean for computer. And once I get the object of the computer, I can perform any operation. Now let's just see whether these things are working or not. So if I'll come over here, do a right click, and run as and Java application, if the things are working, then my Spring IOC is doing its job for me. It is creating the object, and we are asking the container that get me the object. So let me run the Java application right now, but I think we have a problem. It is giving a JNI error has occurred. Please check your installation and try again. And it is giving me a compilation error right now. It is saying this has been compiled by a more recent version of the Java runtime, which is 61.0. Basically what it is saying, as I'm using this container, and this container is coming from the latest version of Spring called Spring 6. Right over here, it is asking me to use a latest Java version, which is 61.0 or something. So what I will do, basically, I will get a latest Java compiler. So I will go over here and I'll go for Maven Java 8 compiler, and I will change my Java compiler over here. I'll copy this compiler source and target over here. I'll go back to my Spring tool suite. Here I'm using the Java 8 compiler. Maybe I'm looking for a newer version of the Java compiler. So I'll go to the pom.xml file. I'll go to the properties and properties tag and paste it over here. And I will be using a newer version of the compiler over here, Java 17. And let's just see whether our Spring container is right now working fine or not. To update this compiler, first of all, let me just do a Maven update quickly. So right click, Maven update project, hit this force update, do an OK. And here our compiler version is right now changed. Cool. Let's just see right now whether our Spring IOC is working, and we are asking the container to get the object of the computer. What we are not creating that object of the computer right now, Spring is creating and giving it to us with the help of the getBean method. And let's just try to execute this right now, and let's just see what is happening. Right now, do a right click, run as and Java application one more time. This time we got another error, and this time it is saying we have an illegal state exception error, and it is saying annotation config application context has not been refreshed yet. So what it is saying actually, whenever we're creating the container object over here, it is saying it has not been refreshed yet. That means what it is asking is, whenever you are creating a container here, this container is an empty container. Now we do not want to create an empty container here. We want to create a container which will manage our application objects, just like computer object, because we have marked it a @component annotation over here. We want the keyboard object to be managed by our Spring container because we have marked this @component annotation over here. So Spring container need to create this object for keyboard and maintain it inside the application context or inside the Spring container, so that whenever we need the keyboard object, we can ask the container that, hey container, get me that object, right? So right now Spring is not able to do so with the help of this line, but I told you this line will basically create a container for us. Then what's the problem? Because whenever we'll be creating the container over here, the container will be created out of a bean configuration file. Okay, so right now the Spring does not know what are the objects that it has to manage. That's why this line only is causing you the problem. This line is right now not creating the objects for you. For an example, if I will just comment this line and comment this line, and if I will just, I have only the container code over here to bootstrap our container, and if I will run my application right now, I will get the same error. Am I getting the error over here? Oh, I'm not getting any error right now. But whenever I'll try to get the bean, I think we will have the error. Now let's just see right now, I'm just doing container.getBean. Let's just do right click, run as in Java application. I think we'll have that error. Yeah, right now we are saying that this annotation config application context has not been refreshed because whenever we are getting the bean out of it, the container does not have that bean called computer. Why it doesn't have that bean? Because right now this context that we are creating, this container that we are creating, does not know what objects it has to manage, what objects it has to keep it inside it. So to make sure this computer and this keyboard, which are component, which are the object the Spring container needs to manage, to let it happen, what we supposed to do, we will go to app.java. First of all, we will do a component scanning over here. So I'll just do a component scanning. And by doing so, what I am saying, hey Spring framework, look for all the components which are available inside this package called Spring IOC. So copy this package name, paste it over here. Now inside this package, whatever the classes like computer, which has the component annotation, keyboard, which has the component annotation, you scan for all the classes like computer, keyboard, or any other classes which has the @component annotation and create the object for it and maintain it inside the container. So by writing this annotation over here on top of the app class, basically I want to use this app class as a configuration class. So I'm going to write a @configuration annotation over here, and this configuration class, I will give it to my container right over here like this. So now whenever the application context will be created, it will look for the configuration class called app. Now here we mark this app as a configuration class. Now the app class has a annotation called ComponentScan, and it will look for all the classes which is available inside this package, and if there is a @component annotation, it will create the object for that class and keep it inside the container. So right now in our app.java class, this container will be created from this configuration file. Look for all the classes, create the objects for those classes which present inside this package and annotated with @component annotation and keep them inside the container. And right now we can ask for the bean over here, and I think this line will not give us any issue. If I'm gonna relaunch my application right now, see, I do not have any issue in my console. Right now, I think I'm able to get my computer object over here. Let's just try to call the method of our computer object right now. If I launch my application right now, boom, there we go. It's just saying starting the computer and plugging in the keyboard. Cool. So the Spring IOC is in action over here. So what is the key takeaway that we have got throughout this entire lesson? The first thing, the application context is how we basically achieve IOC in Spring framework. Application context is the interface, annotation config application context is the implementation class, and this is how we have implemented IOC into our application. The application context made sure that whenever we bootstrap the container, it will basically make sure that the object that my application has, it will manage those objects. And the objects this container will manage, this is what we called bean. So the application context create object for us, whatever the object we have instructed it to manage through the ComponentScan. So basically, if I'll go ahead and comment this couple of lines here, and only if I have the application context bootstrapping line over here, right now, I'm sure that here whatever we have instructed through this app.class, and this app.class is basically component scanning this package, and let's say inside this package Spring IOC we have the computer.java class. This class our application context will manage, and this class object our application context will create. So to make sure it is happening, what I will do, I will go to the computer class, create a constructor, and write a sysout over here, object of computer created. Okay, so when the application context will create the computer class object, it will use the computer constructor to instantiate it, and if it is called, then this is the line which will be printed to my console. Like that, I'll go to my keyboard.java class, and here also I will be writing a constructor, keyboard class object created. Okay, and right now if I'll go to my app.java, and whenever I'll bootstrap my container right over here, you will see my container will be creating the class object in the front. And there we go, object of computer class created and the keyboard class object created. So whenever the container bootstraps, it calls the constructor to create the object of those class and manages inside. The next thing here is that whenever we basically get the bean of the computer class over here and call the stat method over here, the stat method basically uses a plugin method behind the scene, and the plugin method is basically from the keyboard class. But this is a dependency for my computer because my computer class uses the keyboard object. And the way I'm injecting the dependency over here is through the setter method. So whenever the object of computer class is getting created, the Spring IOC also makes sure it will inject the keyboard class dependency by calling this setter method. To make sure it is happening behind the scene, I'll write another sysout here, and I will say calling the set keyboard method for dependency injection, right? So if I'll go to my app.java right now, and if I will run this application one more time, you will see whenever your container loaded, it first does these three things. And for an example, if I will comment this couple of lines one more time, if I have the application context bootstrapping line over here, if I will launch this, first the computer class object created, then the keyboard class object created, then also it invokes the set keyboard method to inject the dependency of the computer class. And then from the container, we can call the getBean method to get a fully functional object of the computer where all the dependency of these objects are also been added by the container, and the container will give you that object, and you can invoke your business method right over here. And this is the feature of dependency injection, which is the takeaway number 2 that you have to understand what the powerful Spring IOC container provides you. So the most important takeaway, we achieved this IOC over here, the inversion control over here with the help of dependency injection. So the dependency injection and Spring IOC works together, and it has been possible by the application context. But one more important thing over here, this application context over here we have created by ourselves. But we have a way around to create the application context in Spring Boot. Basically, in your Spring Boot application, you might not see this line and you might wonder where is the application context is getting bootstrapped. Basically, the way this line could be written in Spring Boot is like this. For an example, right now we will replace this line. We will replace this line with the Spring Boot way of loading the container. To do that, first of all, we will write something called Spring Application, and we'll create an object of this like this: Spring Application. Spring Application is equal to new Spring Application. And the reason why I'm creating this object, because I want to call the run method of the Spring Application like this. And this run method behind the scene will help me to bootstrap a container for me. The run method behind the scene will create a annotation config application context object for me. So to make sure the run method will create a container for me, what I will do, I will basically tell the run method that, okay, run method, you create the application context out of this configuration file. So app.class, which does the component scanning, just take this app.class and put it over here inside the Spring Application parenthesis over here. Now this run method will use this app.class as a configuration class and will do the component scanning of this package and will create the respective objects inside the container that the run method will create behind the scene. And now I will have a hold of that container. I will just say whatever I have written over here, application context container, I'll just put it over here right now. Now the run method basically returns me an container object right over here. And now the rest of the line will remain same as this. Now if I'm going to do this right now, and if I'm going to launch my application, it will work as usual, right? So if I'm going to run this, see, starting the computer and plugging in the keyboard method, it also makes sure that whenever the run method basically bootstrap in the till line number 29, it basically made sure it has created the computer class object, it has created the keyboard class object, and also it has set the dependency of the computer class by calling the set keyboard method, which is pretty straightforward. So one more thing, one more improvement I can do over here in Spring Boot, we do not write this couple of annotation by ourselves. Rather, we can just write a simple annotation called @Spring Boot Application. And now if you're going to hover on this, it also has an annotation called Spring Boot configuration, which is equivalent to the @configuration annotation, and also it has a component scan annotation over here. So right now, if I'm going to be having this and relaunch my application, it will work in the same way over here. But if you're going to remove this annotation over here, then the component scanning will not happen. Spring Boot will not scan this particular package called Spring IOC and will not instantiate the computer and keyboard object and will not put it inside the container. So whenever I'm going to be doing a getBean and asking for the computer class, I'll be having a no bean definition found exception, I believe. So if I'm going to run this, you can see no such bean definition exception of the computer. So right now the computer class bean is not found because right now we have not activated the component scanning. So using this annotation also you can activate the component scanning in Spring Boot. This does mean that this app class right now stays inside this package. So whenever you run this particular class, wherever this starter class or the configuration class present, it will basically scan that particular package. Right now it is scanning the same package over here where this particular class present, which is a configuration file. So it will search this class, and it will scan for all these classes. And if there is a component annotation present, it will create the bean for that and put it inside the container. That's interesting, isn't it? As you understand right now, the Spring IOC has been achieved by using the dependency injection feature. So here, as you can see, whenever we're asking our container, that container get us a bean for computer, the computer bean that the container is providing us, it's a fully constructed object. That means whatever the dependency this computer class has, like keyboard over here, that also been injected, and that injection process has been taken care by Spring. And here Spring has done the setter based injection because we have written that auto-word annotation over here on top of the setter method. Like the setter injection, we can also do a constructor based injection. For an example, here we have a computer class constructor. Let me bring it down to here. Let's say if I want this constructor to inject the keyboard instance for me, then what I will do, I'll go ahead and comment out this setter method over here. Inside the computer class constructor, I will simply define the keyboard instance over here. I'll just write keyboard and keyword, and I will just set the reference over here. Right now what will happen, whenever the computer class object will be created, Spring will first instantiate using this constructor present over here. But while invoking the computer class constructor to create the computer object in order to put it inside the Spring container, Spring will first say, okay, here there is something defined by the developer. And if you are defining something in the constructor parameter, then that's a dependency injection that the Spring needs to perform. So if you define any class object here inside the constructor parameter, just understand this word, whenever you are defining anything inside the constructor parameter, that's the duty of the Spring to instantiate that particular object as well. So right now when Spring will basically instantiate this computer class constructor, it will find this keyboard class as a constructor parameter. So Spring will think that this is a dependency that the computer class need because it is inside the constructor parameter. So it will go to the keyboard class first and will basically create the keyboard object by invoking this particular constructor. And then once that object is available, the Spring will come back to the computer class again and will create the computer class object by passing in the keyboard class instance inside the computer class parameter in order to inject the dependency of the keyboard and in order to create a fully functional object of the computer, which will be delivered to us over here whenever we'll be asking for the computer object to the container by calling the getBean method. To make sure that is happening, let's just see that whether that is happening or not. Let me just save my application and let me relaunch my application, and let's just notice the console over here. So it is just giving a null pointer exception, and it is saying cannot invoke the plugin method over here because the this.keyboard is null. Why it is? I just want the constructor injection to be text place right now. Let's just see what is going to happen. Let's just go to the computer class again. Well, let's just analyze why the keyboard dependency has not been set over here, and that is the reason why we're getting the null pointer exception, because null dot something over here will be giving us this null pointer exception right over here, because the this dot keyboard is null, because this keyboard is null. Why it is null? Because I told you whenever the computer class object will be created, it will be using this constructor. Whether the constructor has been used here, and there we go. You can see the computer class constructor over here. That means the computer class constructor has been called. And as I have told you, whenever the computer class constructor will be called, so the Spring will notice that the computer has a dependency of keyboard, which is true. So it will create the object of keyboard first. So let's just see our console, and you can see the keyboard class object has created first, and then the computer class object is getting created by using the constructor. But I also have told you, if there is some dependency that we are specifying over here, the Spring will inject that dependency right now because that object is already there available in the container. So while creating the computer object, it will inject the keyboard reference over here and will set it to this. So that thing we have missed it actually. So we have to put over here this dot keyboard. So we are setting the keyboard value over here as whatever Spring will provide over here. So we are not going to instantiate this keyboard. Whenever Spring will call this computer, it will give us the keyboard class object that we will simply take and set it to this dot keyboard over here, which is the dependency of the computer. Right now, if you're going to go to the app.java and run this application, and I think it should work fine, and you can see starting the computer and plugging in the keyboard. So an important thing that I wanted to mention over here, so for a class like computer, whenever you are putting any dependency like this inside the constructor parameter, that's what we call dependency injection that need to be performed by the container. One funny thing you can notice over here is that I am not defining the @AutoWord annotation over here, which basically does the dependency injection for us. That's basically, you can see even the IDE is complaining about it, and it is saying remove the unnecessary AutoWord, because I know this AutoWord basically tells Spring to do dependency injection, but in this case, as I said, whenever you put anything over here inside the computer parameter, the Spring can understand that that's basically a dependency that it needs to inject. So first, Spring will make sure to instantiate all the dependency that you'll be mentioning over here inside the constructor parameter. First, it will create their object first, like the keyboard object first. And once those dependent object has been created, then it will basically call the computer class constructor, provide all the objects that it needs, and basically create the computer class object for you. And you actually do not need a @AutoWord annotation to tell Spring that it has to do a constructor based injection. Spring can understand that. And if you do not want to do a constructor based injection also like this, you can also do a property injection directly over here by writing the @AutoWord annotation over here. Right now, you do not need a setter. You do not need a constructor. You are directly saying, hey Spring, I just want you to inject the object of the keyboard. Right now also, if you're going to do save it, if you're going to run this, you can see the expected output over here. You can see first the keyboard class object has been created, and then Spring might have created the computer class object for you. And then basically it is calling the start method and is printing the output. Okay, so you can also put the constructor over here for the computer, and you can just write sysout over here, and you can write computer class object created. And if you're gonna run this, you can see here, first the computer class object got created, then the keyboard class object got created, and then our method logs are over here. So basically right now, Spring has managed the dependency injection somehow and injected the keyboard class object over here that has been created before. And now it is availing us this particular object for computer so that we can call the start method. But here is a very important question for the interview room, that whenever you do AutoWord over here on a field, whenever you do field-based injection, there are three different types of injection: field-based, setter-based, constructor-based. But whenever you do the field-based injection like this, how Spring basically managed to inject the dependency for keyboard over here using what kind of approach? And that's a topic for another day. If you're in a hurry, you can watch my AutoWording video in my Spring Core playlist series. But that basically concludes this particular lesson, which is on Spring IOC. You might ask me a question here that I will ask, how can I trust you? How can you say that this run method creates an application context or a annotation config application context object behind the scene? Well, I'm going to be showing you quickly so that you won't be having that doubt in future. Well, here in the run method, if I'll go into that, this is the run method written by the Spring Boot people. If I go into that, you can see this run method does a whole lot of things. But I want to drag your attention for this run method code over here. If I'll scroll down right here, you can see inside the run method here, right here, there is a line of code here called create application context. And this is a method which basically returns you a context object, which is basically configurable application context. This is another interface which extends to the application context. So the super interface is application context. So we have different types of contexts in Spring, like application context, configurable application context, web application context, reactive application context, like different types of application contexts is there to create different type of Spring Boot application. Let's say you are creating a reactive application in Spring, you will be creating a reactive application context. If you are creating a web application in Spring, you will be creating a web application context. If you are creating a standalone application in Spring, just like us, you will be creating an annotation config application context. So their superclass is configurable application context. And this one superclass is not superclass, super interface actually is application context. But anyhow, in the run method right now, you can see the create application context method is there. If I go into it, you can see it internally have a create method. If I'll go to the implementation of this create method right now, you can see it has 3 implementation. One is called default application context factory for a standalone application, reactive web server application context factory. If you are creating a web application using Spring Boot, this is the class which will be responsible. Servlet web server application context factory. If you are creating a web application, the normal web application, servlet based web application, then this is the application context which will be created for you by this class. Right now I'll click on default application context factory. Now if I will go into this create method, you can see over here it is basically helping you to create a default application context. If I click on this method, let's just see here, you can see it is returning a new annotation config application context. So internally, the annotation config application context object only they are creating the one that you are creating over here previously. While you are creating a standalone application, the run method behind the scene creates the same annotation config application context. So now you can say this run method internally creates an application context for you or a container for you, which basically means IOC when we talk about Spring Boot or Spring Framework. Okay, so in this video we understand about a concept called inversion of control. Inversion of control means the developer will not create the object, rather the framework like Spring will create the object for the developer. And also Spring will make sure it will not only create the object for the developer, rather it will give developer a ready to use object. For an example, all the dependency that need to set for the object that will also be injected by Spring, and Spring will hand over a fully functional object that you can just take and can call whatever the methods you will call, and you will not be getting any null pointer exception because the dependency will be injected by Spring right before it will deliver the object to you. So we understood that the IOC over here has been achieved by using the dependency injection concept over here. So it's a very simple thing, but I think we have spent enough time to understand and we have explored a lot of different things. So that's it for this video then. I'll see you guys in another interview series. Follow me on Instagram, follow me on Facebook, give me a comment and ask me any questions you would like to ask. And I'll see you guys in another interview preparation series video. Till then, bye bye, take care and happy coding.